Good morning and good evening, everyone. Welcome in Salesforce Apex R. Today we are going to talk about ApexDefined data types. And my name is Amit Chaudhary. I'm the founder of the Salesforce Apex R and the organizer of the Farm Intended Developer Group. And today our speaker is Katie. So let me hand over to her.
Thank you so much, Amit. As you mentioned, my name is Katie Kodes, and I am a Salesforce both admin and developer in Minnesota. And I am so excited to be here with you to talk about a new feature from the summer 19 release that I think makes for enhanced admin developer collaboration. And so if you want to see the blog post that this is based off of, you can go to my website, Katie Kodes with 2 Ks because it was taken with a C.com/summer19. And the blog post was geared at admin. So I just want to show you a quick thing. This whole thing, it's a great read to get you oriented. Scroll all the way to the end of the post to the further reading section at the bottom, like summary. And see this part that says, I have example code just for devs here. I have a whole other GitHub README that actually has the code you're going to see today. So if you're looking for that, just remember to skip to the end of that blog post instead of wondering, where is it? So katiecodes.com/summer19. So what are we talking about today? Today, we are talking about a feature called ApexDefined data types. And that sounds really developer-y, and it is, but on the other hand, it's for Flow, which is really admin-y. And it is actually all about making, just like Invocable Apex, it is a feature within Flow that makes it easier to offload certain things to the land of Apex, but overall keep your workflow in Flow. And so I think the easiest way to start by talking about what this is all for is to just show off a few things that it can do. I think that the basics of what I've found it's good for are that, number one, it gives admins the ability to clump together things like if you have 5 strings that are all related to each other somehow, they all have to do the same thing. Instead of having to have 5 different string type variables in your flow called string 1, string 2, string 3, string 4, string 5, you can define an Apex class that has 5 attributes in it that are public and that you put a special annotation on called string 1, string 2, string 3, string 4, and string 5. And then you can use that class in Apex to have merely a variable called myString. And then later, if you need those subparts, you can say myString.string1. So it helps keep flows from having clutter in them. So that's not actually the way Salesforce advertised it, but I think that's one of the coolest features that any admin can get started with, and I'm really excited to show that off. Similarly, instead of just, when you have Invocable Apex, it's just an Apex method, which is essentially just a Java method, which means you can only return one thing from it. And so you can't, you can return a primitive, you can return an S object, and you can return lists thereof. But as far as, returning string 1, string 2, string 3, string 4, and string 5 all at once, you were out of luck unless you happen to, those things that you wanted clumped together happen to already belong on a native Salesforce custom or standard object. So if you wanted to return first name, last name, and email together, you could hack it and use this, the S object type of contact, even if you weren't really returning a contact, to sort of clump those together. But now you can just create your own single thing to return that has multiple parts within it, which makes it a lot easier rather than maybe an admin having to call 5 different flows to set those 5 different values. Sorry, to call 5 different invocable Apex methods. Now they only have to call 1, and all 5 come back as part of the same custom Apex object type. And finally, what's really nifty is that there is a JSON.c serialize method in Apex where if you provide a class whose public variables essentially match public attributes match the keys seen in the JSON object, then, and you provide the name of that class to JSON.deserialize, then you don't have to manually loop over the JSON. Apex will do it for you and store the data into an object of that class. And that was all very nice, but again, you still had no way to actually get those pieces of information back to a flow. Well, now you do, because that object from that custom class can go back into the flow, and your admin can just start clicking subvariables from that. So that's what I think the basics are. Now, jumping down to number 6, Salesforce had this in there. I highly recommend watching Alex, I don't know if it's Elstein or Edelstein, but watching him talk about what he had in mind for this, because what he shows is having admins build incredibly complex flows that do the looping themselves. Like if the JSON object has a sublist in it, having just basically throwing your JSON deserialized output over the fence to your admin and saying, good luck, and letting them then try to loop over it in flow, which wouldn't really have been possible or easy before. And now it is. And so he's saying this is a lot easier for developers. They can just let their admins spend 5 days trying to figure out how to do this. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not sure. It probably depends on how complex the JSON is, because you can do a lot more in an Apex for loop very quickly than you could do in a flow loop, because flow loops just, sometimes you got to jump through a lot of hoops to get them working just right. So tough call, but I am going to show that as well. So let's get started on actually making any of this concrete. We are going to go over to my Salesforce, and we are going to create a brand new flow. We're going to just call this. So if no one has seen flow before, it is one of Salesforce's many declarative development tools. It is the most advanced of all of them. You have process builder and workflow rules, which are probably the simplest ones, and then flow is meant to provide almost Apex-like control, only the whole thing is point and click. And there are two sides to it. There are auto-launched flows, which work a lot like a trigger, but then there are screen flows, which work maybe a little bit more like a visual force page. It's meant for building data entry wizards and that sort of thing. So in this case, what we're going to do is we are going to start, we have to declare a variable just like we would in code. So I'm going to say that I want to create a new variable. And where is my, sorry, I'm also going to need a dev console. So what I'd like to show you first is my greeting phrase book. This is my very first class that can be used as an Apex-defined data type. And what it needs is this, I'll see if I can get this all a little bigger. It needs this Aura enabled flag. It does not need invocable variable, but I have it all ready to go for my next demo. Invocable variable, again, is not necessary, but all it takes for an admin to get started, if they want that sort of string 1, string 2, string 3, or string 5, my string grouper class is literally to do that. They say public string, and then they give it a name, and they make sure the class is at least public, and each attribute that they would like flow to be able to see has to have this Aura enabled. So this is almost something that an admin can do themselves, or it's going to take you maybe 5 minutes to do it if they really don't understand, or they're afraid to try it themselves. So we're going to say that we want to do a variable, and I'm going to call it my greeting variable. And I'm going to say I want it to be Apex defined, and then I'm going to say I want it to be of type greeting phrasebook. Now I could make it a list greeting phrasebook, but in this case I just want to return one page out of my greeting phrasebook at a time. So I'm just going to put in one thing there. Now, in this case, I'm going to say, okay, I want to display information from this variable. So I'm going to call this my display info. And we'll take off some of this stuff that we don't really need. And so what we're doing now is we're building our wizard output screen. We're not even going to have like a wizard input screen, so I guess it's not really much of a wizard. I'm just using this as a way to put information on the screen. So I am going to call this info display. So this is a little section on my page. I have to give it a name. And I'm just going to start with my greeting variable, and I am going to put in how you say bye, and I'm going to say bye. And then I'm going to say, that's probably the last thing I want, say hi. And then I'm going to, so this is the magic, is that when I start clicking, looking for what I want to put in, I don't have 3 variables here. I have one nice little variable with an arrow and then a sub-pick list. So this is just tidying up things so that admins don't have to scroll as far to keep things together that belong together anyway. So I'm going to make this really big so everybody can see it. And I'm going to give my flow a name before I forget. I'm going to call it flow 1. Live. I don't remember if I already did a flow 1. And now what I have to do is I actually have to put some data into that variable, because all I did was declare the variable, essentially. I have to actually populate it. So I'm going to call this set phrase book values. And I am going to, again, it's like, what exactly do I want to set? I don't have to set all 3 parts at once. I'm going to. And so I'm going to say that I happen to speak French as my second language. So I'm going to choose that. I'm going to say that how you say hi is, I'm going to say salut. That's more of hi. Bonjour is kind of hello. And then how you say bye? Well, that would be au revoir if it were formal, but again, it's actually a little bit one of those languages like Italian or Hawaiian where hello and goodbye. Oops, wrong way. Don't want to set it to itself. Salut, you say the same thing. So now I have to connect all of this. So I've built, basically they're almost like different methods, and now I'm actually setting them to invoke each other from a more code-like perspective. And if I hit run, hopefully this will work. Live code gods, please be with me. Ta-da! So there it is. That is literally just the very basic. If anybody ever is building a lot of flows and you want to say, hey, there's a new trick ever since summer 19, I can make your flows cleaner. This is a thing that you can show them. Literally, you could walk away right now and show an admin something cool, even if you had to drop off the call right now. So I think from an admin's perspective, this is possibly the coolest part of Apex-defined data types. But now let's take a look at something that gets a little bit deeper into the admin dev collaboration. So we have greeting phrase book, but what if instead of manually typing French and salut, salut, we want to have an invocable Apex method that can return one of these? So I have a class I've made called greeting generator, and it has one invocable method, like classes can only have one, I believe, and I've called it get greeting. And it returns what looks like a list of these greeting phrase book objects, but in invocable method land, that actually means it only returns one. I have not dived deep into why that is the case, but it's just the way invocable Apex works, that you return a list of whatever you're actually trying to return. So you return a list of lists if you're actually trying to return a list of something. So that is actually one reason that I delegated this to a helper method that's private, because I literally wanted to make sure that at the end I, no. Now here we go. I wanted one that just returned a random greeting, and then I made this just wrap it in a list just to keep things separate so I didn't confuse myself. So what's really going on as we get one greeting phrase book? Well, I am literally typing in 3 different languages worth of greetings and then picking a random number and returning it. So that's what we got going on here. Let's take a look at how we can use that. So I am going to click on this and get rid of my controls that set my value. I'm just going to set this aside. I don't actually have to delete it right now if I think I might change my mind, if I'm an admin and I'm not so sure this is going to work. But right now I'm going to drag an action to the screen. And what kind of action is it? Well, I don't exactly know how to find it from there, but if I just start typing here, looking for greeting, there it is, get greeting. And you're going to want to give your invocable methods good labels because your admins can't actually see that name. They see the label when they are shopping. They can see the class name and they can see the label, but they can't see the method name, which is a little quirky. So I'm going to call this set variable contents from Apex. And then I am going to, I kind of wish it would let me just set all of the properties straight into my greeting variable and just say, well, just put them where they belong. But I do actually have to manually put how you say bye into how you say bye and how you say hi into how you say hi and so on. It's still better than the alternative of having to set each of these variables one at a time by having 3 different Apex invocations, each of which returns just one string. At least it's still organized. So from my perspective, although this involves now actually getting a dev to write you Invocable Apex, it's still a little bit of an admin tidiness trick as far as whose life is going to be nicer. Other than, I suppose a dev wouldn't really enjoy having to write 3 different Invocable Apex methods and then manage them and say, what were these all for? So we now have our variable assignment happening from a different helper method, essentially. And if we do this, it looks the same, but if I refresh, please work. What happened? There it is. Random is funny like that. You can get 10 heads in a row when you toss a coin. I don't know if we're ever going to see Spanish. There we go. So you can, when you have something that is too complicated for an admin to do in pure flow, and they want to delegate a part of this process to Apex, you can now send more mature responses back from Apex. You can take a custom object, not just an S object, not just a primitive. You can actually return anything you want from Apex. So we are done with this one. And now we are going to take a quick look at doing something very similar, but now our Invocable Apex is going to go out and talk to the internet. And one thing you will need for this is remote site settings. You can get errors if you don't tell Salesforce that it is okay to make a call out to a setting. So you can see that I've added several public APIs to my list, and what yes, no that WTF will give you a random yes or no, and it'll give you whether you can, there is a part of the API that will let you force the answer, so it'll tell you whether you did or not, and then it will give you a silly GIF of somebody shaking their head yes, or shaking their head no, or occasionally shrugging maybe. So that's what's going to go on here. We are going to go to flow 3. And build essentially the same thing that we built before. I got it a little bit started so we wouldn't have to waste too much time setting up some of the stuff that makes a picture actually show up. I have one more thing. I have something called a text template that actually lets you put stuff between the image tag and all that. So I have got an output screen that displays my yes or no. My display yes, no has all this stuff inside of an image tag. And again, I have already set up storing this stuff into a response I set up earlier called yes, no response variable. And let me show you the magic that we're going to be doing. So we have yes, no. That's all it is. It's a lot like our greeting phrase book. We have yes, no generator, which again has the same kind of wrapper that puts things in a list. And then we've got one that just gets a single one. And this is a very basic Apex HTTP callout. We're saying this is where we're going, and we're going to do a get against it. And if it comes back okay, we are going to do JSON.deserialize. We are going to tell it about the existence of our yes, no class. And we're going to pass it the responses body. And then we're going to cast it to a yes, no. So this is that magic little, if whatever's coming back from this server looks a heck of a lot like this, this method can do all the work. Now, every time we are testing a service, it's probably not a bad idea to have a test class. So when we want to test our yes, no generator, I am mocking up a response that is a no, and it says I didn't force it, and then has this particular image hard-coded. And I'm going to just tell the unit test to use that instead of a live callout, and then go ahead and run get yes, no, and make sure that the list of yes, no's did not come back empty, and then grab the first one and make sure that the answer equals no. So if I don't want to run the test, but it passes. I'll tell you that. So again, you're gonna, once you start working with HTTP callouts, make sure that you are using mocking so that you can write test classes. You don't want to do this blind. And I found that just using some straight up debug open execute anonymous window I have a different one in here, but you can just do a quick little system assert false and then take like yes, no generator dot, what was it? It's get yes, no. And this is, ta-da, you can now see that it came back live from the server. So that's a nice thing about public methods, is they're pretty easy to test just by calling them. So let's see this run from a flow, because the admin doesn't need to know all that stuff about testing it. All right, we've got no. Gonna hit refresh. We've got yes, no, no. So very easy for admins to include data from HTTP callouts in visual user interface facing things. Sanitizing, trusting your endpoint to not be sending you back a GIF full of viruses, obviously important points, but hopefully this is a nifty dog and pony show that you can show your admins if you want to give them a little bit of inspiration. Again, setting things up on the flow side is no harder than anything I showed you this morning. The third flow was no different than the second one that we built. So I'm going to move on to just a couple more things. You can, let's see, if the JSON sends back a list, we have another one where Indian city. So in this case, we've got an API that has a whole bunch of cities in India. don't know if it actually has all of them, but boy, does it have a lot of them. And so this is just returning every city it has in the database, I suppose. And so what we've got is a very simple one level deep JSON list. So we could, the way that Salesforce envisioned this is that we would just throw the list back over the fence to our admin and let our admin deal with if they wanted to grab the first one or the last one or a random one, make them do that. Again, I don't always think that doing things in flow is the best way. In this case, let's say we want a random one. Functionality for picking random numbers in Apex and for accessing a member of a list in Apex is way more advanced than it is in flow. So I'm just going to show you how, again, in this case, we're going to say that each one of these is what we want to think of as an Indian city, state, district. And then when we do our helper, all Indian cities. So one of the things that I did here was I just wanted to have something to sort of pass things, just a place to throw this. I don't even remember why I put it outside of this helper method. But anyway, I think for execution context kind of stuff, to minimize the API calls so that we wouldn't have to do it over and over again if we were in the same execution context. So I'm going to get that whole list once, just lazy populate it. And then I am going to take this JSON deserialize, and it's pretty nifty. I'm doing the same thing, only instead of passing it IndianCity.class, I'm passing it list of IndianCity.class. And then I'm going to cast it, instead of to an Indian city, I'm going to cast it to a list of Indian cities. And that's it. So that's my little part where I actually populate it. And then again, to get just a single one, I am just picking a random number and returning that. And then I'm putting it back into a list, but it's not the same list of 200 things, or I don't actually know how many they have. It didn't look like it took very long to scroll through it. So it's probably not every city in India. But we're going to take our one city and put it back into a list that has only one thing, just because flow is weird like that. So let's take a look at our flow. This is going to be a flow just like the other ones. We are going to assign a random value and, via Invocable Apex, and then display it on a screen in big print. So we're going to run it. We've got random cities. So the main thing that I wanted to show you here is that you don't have to only deal with JSON that comes back from the web that is all nice and has a dictionary at the top level. If you have a list at the top level, that's okay. All you have to do is just tell JSON.deserialize that you're dealing with a list, not that you're dealing with a class. And so then you just cast it to a list instead of casting it to that class. So another question might be, what if the root is maybe a dictionary, but it has another object inside of it? So I'm going to take a look at city zip generator. I now want to go out to this API. And so what I'm getting here is, it is indeed a dictionary at the top, but then it's got like a list of objects, kind of like those. There's a few postal codes within the city of Mankato, Minnesota has about 4 different postal codes. It's a bigger city. And so it has a list of postal codes inside of it. And so how would we JSON.deserialize that and throw it over the fence to the admins? Well, from the developer side, what we need to do is we actually need to have, we cannot just take So this is our outermost thing because this matches the structure of what we're seeing. We're seeing country abbreviation, we're seeing country, we're seeing place name, all that kind of stuff. We've got one called places. So we're just matching what we see in the sample JSON. Now, what happened to the spaces? I am going to take care of that in the invocation of it. I'm just going to strip them all out for ease of use because it's nice to have simple space-free. I tried actually replacing the spaces with underscores and things just didn't work. So I recommend replacing them with empty strings. But what are we supposed to do about this places thing? Okay, well, that's great. We have a list of dictionaries inside here. So let's go here and put a class inside of this class. It's like a helper class, right? No, you can't do that because it turns out that in Aura, that Aura enabled flag is only visible to flow at the top level of a class. So what we need to do, and this can get a little bit annoying if you have very complex JSON coming back from the web, you are going to need an entire place class, top level. You have to have 2 top level classes just to get this one thing parsed. And so then when we go over to city zip generator, again, we've got this, okay, I've got this regular expression that I did to just get the key out of the JSON. And so what I do is this time I pass to JSON deserialize. I pass again cityzip.class and cityzip, not a list of them because this one at the outermost level is just a plain old object. It's just a dictionary. But instead of passing it response.getBody, I am passing it response.getBody, replace all. And how do I not accidentally replace the patterns, the spaces in my values? Well, I looked for a particular pattern that involved just making sure that it had a colon and a space. And I figured there were not going to be any city names or zip codes in America that had a colon and a space in them. So that was probably safely going to be the keys. So that's how I did that. And so from a dev perspective, you may notice I didn't explicitly have to ever do JSON.deserialize with place. It was fine to pass it cityzip, and then cityzip told it about place, and then place was there. So that's the subtlety of how you work with complicated structures. Which then is a question of, okay, that's all very nice, but what is an admin supposed to do with this? I've put it into an object with a list of objects. Like, what's the admin supposed to do all that? And here's the big reveal of what allegedly Salesforce thinks admins are going to love. I don't know. I have my questions about that. They probably do want you to build something that just picks a random zip code from Mankato or counts zip codes for you or something. I don't know if they actually want to do this themselves, but maybe if you've got, I think honestly, this advanced Apex data types, the clumping thing is for everybody, but this particular thing is probably for the kinds of people like Jen Lee and Brian Kwong who write tutorials for other admins about how to use Flow as amazingly as possible. I'm not sure, unless people are Flow addicts, how much they're going to want to do this, but now they can. So we've got our get city, and that is going to store country and country abbreviation and place name and state abbreviation and places. Why did I call it places? Well, if I go to all of the Apex defined variables, I've got things like, so I've got my city, which is where I'm sending that back. I'll show you, everything was being dumped into my city. And that was an Apex defined variable of the class cityzip. But I actually am going to, and that went to my city.places because that was part of the definition of that class. But I'm still going to need another one because what actually then needs to happen is you can't loop directly over a collection typed attribute of an Apex defined variable in Flow. I have to take my city.places and I have to pass it to yet another variable. So that whole thing of Apex defined data types saving you extra variables, not true when it comes to nesting. So literally this whole thing just copies this to an entire dedicated variable that is a variable of type place where I clicked allow multiple values. That makes it a list of places. Then I have to loop over this one at a time. So I'm looping over place list because it won't let me loop over mycity.places because, I don't know, it's just a quirk of flow. Maybe one day they'll change that. And then I am looping through it, and let's see, the variable all zip codes is text. What did I do here? Oh yeah, that's right. I'm setting my loop variable. I'm looping over place list, and every time I loop, I have to call this current place. It does need its own variable. So this is, again, a variable of type place, but it is not a collection. It's just a single one. So that's just like your 4x in collection in Apex. Same idea. So there's x. And for each of those, we are going to take something out of x and add it to another variable that is just a big old string. You can see here I've got another one I set up, a declared, that is a big string. What on earth is render current place detail? Well, again, it's a text template because flow things are weird. What I am doing here is I am basically just taking whatever already exists in all zip codes as text, concatenating it with the zip code from the current place, and concatenating that with a line break. This is how the life of an admin works in Flow. I took this straight from Jen Lee's blog about how you do this kind of thing. This is what they do when they're declaratively developing. So will anybody really want to do that once your JSON gets too complicated? I don't know, but once we do that, all we have to do is just say, okay, well, the place name and the state abbreviation, we can just go grab those straight out of the very first variable we populated, my city. And then we're going to take our all zip codes as text, big string that we built with the line breaks and everything, and we're going to display that on a new line. So if we do that, and let's make this a little bigger, actually. I like bigger ones. And we click run. Ta-da, we as the admin were able to display the 4 zip codes in Mankato, Minnesota that we did not personally ourselves know. The internet told them about us, told us about them. So that's the big reveal of what Salesforce wanted to empower admins to do, was to have a dev not have to do a lot of work. This is not particularly fancy. A dev has to know how to do an HTTP request, know how to declare classes and their attributes, and know how to use JSON deserialize. And that's it. All the rest of the work, it's like, bye admin, see you later. And all the rest of the work is on the admin's shoulders. So that's the new feature in all of its glory. And I would love to hear from people if you find admins who are excited to do that because they are looking for callouts. And I think we have time for questions now. So I'm going to pull up the chat. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. Okay, is a test class required for a class? If you want to deploy it for production, yes. You can't just keep on deploying classes to production. Oh, sorry, for the class, I see. If you want test class, as far as these classes, the ones that are just a bunch of attributes, they don't actually have any methods. That's a good question. I suppose you are slowly adding to your lines of code that are potentially uncovered, although let's see, if I go to my test city zip generator and I run test, I am curious. It may actually cover those because it is okay. So that just ran right now. Interesting. It is not considering them covered. But maybe it doesn't matter. I don't know. You may want to have like, if you're worried about dropping below 75% because of all of these extra lines of code in Apex classes that you need to deploy to production, you may want to have some silly methods like a helper instantiator that you would never actually use in a flow, but maybe you use in the test class just to exercise setting things and get 100% coverage. I'm not exactly sure. That would be a really great question that I will try to follow up with and tweet to Apex Hours. I'm just writing this down. Do you need to test attribute only classes? But as far as stuff like your city zip generator, absolutely test that. Number one, you want to know that it works for regression testing. And number two, you're going to need your lines of code coverage. So that's great. Does anybody have more questions about this? Comments? I'm really curious if anybody's inspired by it, or if you're kind of like, huh. I'm a little bit somewhere in the middle. I mean, do you have any questions, thoughts?
Hello.
Yes, I.
Yeah. So can we ask other people for the question and answer?
Absolutely. I am ready. I am ready to hear what people have to say.
Okay. So let me. Okay, guys, if you have any question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question directly to the Katie. Even I can see there was only one question in the chat window, that but like people were asking like we need a test class for Apex class. So I already mentioned yes we need, and you also demonstrated that test class with the mock class. So I hope we are good. If we don't have any question, we are good to wrap up.
Fantastic.
I have a question, Amit.
Okay.
Great. Hello.
Is there any trailhead module to cover these things?
As of when I checked 2 weeks ago, they had not put it out on Trailhead yet. They had it in the release notes. And the reason I wrote this blog post was because the release notes were just a little bit like, here's a thing you can do. And I was like, okay, why? So the release notes will definitely give you a little bit more detail on syntax, and hopefully they will come out with a formal Trailhead module on it. I do actually also recommend, let's see, if we go back to my blog, wherever it went. Here we go. So if I go to this additional example code just for devs, GitHub, and I scroll down near the bottom, and I talk about, let's see, release video. Yeah, here we go. So we go to Inspired by Alex's official Salesforce video from 1253 to 1929. You're going to get a much better demo.
We lost your screen.
Yes. So watch those 7 minutes to see a little bit more context for that last thing, and then hopefully there will be a Trailhead soon.
Thank you, Katie.
Oh yeah, and he also had 2 blog posts related to it. So linked as well. So again, if you're wondering where it is that I put all these links, it was a summer 19 feature. So I just dedicated katiecodes.com/summer19. That's going to stay as this blog post. So you can always find what you're looking for without having to remember too much what the URL was.
So Katie, all the endpoints have been added in the remote sites, right?
Yes, for the demo, I did that ahead of time, so I wouldn't have an awkward demo. Does anybody need to see adding a website to the remote sites?
Okay. Any other question? Oh,
If you try to actually call it out, you will get this error.
we are not able to see your screen if you are sharing something, Katie.
Oh my gosh, how long have I not been sharing?
You just up here.
Okay. If you try to make a call out and it is not in your remote site settings, the error will be pretty obvious. That said, it won't be obvious to your admin. It will just say an error occurred, and then hopefully you'll get the email saying what the error was. So that is one reason that I highly recommend doing a little bit of anonymous Apex to actually just make sure your call out works before your admin has to test it themselves in production.
Okay, if we don't have any question, we are good for wrap up. And thank you so much, Katie, for a great session today. And thank you everyone for the joining us. And stay connected. We will post more detail about the future session on our website. And I will upload this particular video on YouTube. So please subscribe our YouTube channel to get a notification when this video will be uploaded. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.